Hello, BookTube, and welcome back to Garbaugust 2025. This is Criminali's great beloved BookTube event celebrating trash in the month of August, where you are encouraged to just stop worrying and read trash in August. The world is going to heck in a handbasket. Might as well read some trash. I love Garbaugust. An enthusiastic consumer of trash, both the kind that we're not considering this month, the kind that plenty of people profess to say is good, and also the kind that we are most celebrating this time around, which is the trash that we can all agree is trash, even in the best case scenario, the trash whose author will agree that it's trash. That is just the sweet spot, which is why one of the buddy reads for this time around for Garbaugust is the Jilly Cooper novel. Jilly Cooper is very much in on the joke of the kind of stuff she writes and has become wealthy because of it. Good for her. Bless her. I don't know exactly where I fall on that spectrum for today's video because last night I read this. They Both Were Naked by Philip Wiley. I just recently found this paperback at the Brattle Bookshop. And I knew already what this was. I knew that this was one of a few attempts that Philip Wiley made to write a big, serious novel. He was very fond of writing novels that everyone in the world except him could tell at a glance were not serious novels, were just silly potboilers. But I think as he got older, this was written in the 1960s, I think as he got older, he started to want a literary legacy. Now, the literary legacy that he has is one that he would not have chosen and that he would not have liked, which is that he is viewed as a precursor to a whole bunch of things. A lot of writers, comic book writers, pulp writers, science fiction writers, a lot of writers read the latest Philip Wiley story, or novella, or novel, and found something in it that they could steal. Found some idea in it that they think they could take and transform into something that would stand on its own. Quite a few novelists did that. The first signature example was Doc Savage. The biggest example of all was Superman. And that is, I think, Philip Wiley's legacy in as a footnote in literary history. If he has one at all, it will be that he gave lots of ideas to other people about a man who has superpowers, about a giant who comports himself as a gentleman in public, about catastrophic climate change. And in this book, he has quite a few of those ideas on his mind. About uncontrolled plutocracy, about kleptocracy, and about a whole bunch of other subjects. Climate change comes up in this book quite a bit. But that's not enough to claw you out of the pit of garbage. This is still really bad. It's still starchy, stilted prose. It doesn't matter how long it is. I think this is the longest novel he ever wrote. It doesn't matter how long it is. It doesn't matter how obvious its pretensions are to the quality. It still isn't good at all, really. It still isn't really good at all. And as I was finishing it up last night, I was thinking, well, okay, if it isn't any good, and it isn't any good, well, what about stuff in it that may do the Philip Wiley thing? Nothing that he ever wrote was any good. In terms of quality, in terms of the actual worth of the prose, Gladiator's not good. Only Michael K. Vaughan thinks it is. Those things, the things that he wrote were mostly notable for guessing trends correctly, for spotting things that have the potential to affect the future. Not anything else. There are no well-drawn characters here. There's no well-chosen verse. There are a couple of well-chosen adverbs, some adverbial choices in here, adjectival choices that I will steal, but usually not. It was a slog to read. But at one point, we get a little moment that is explicitly trying to do the Philip Wiley thing. The rest of this is sort of a lot of it is obsessed with wealth and status and backstabbing and whatnot. A lot of it is Harold Robbins. and is very much intended to be marketed that way. There are elements that aren't that, but a lot of it is that. But at one point, Philip Wiley has a character prognosticate on trends that affect the future. In other words, get up and give an actual speech. He's introduced at a stadium. He gives a speech to an audience of scientists in which he protractedly muses about what trends may be important in the future. He just gets up and does that. It's not really effectively part of the novel. You could take it out without losing any momentum in what little drama there is here. But I thought we would go through that scene together. Because Philip Wiley, in his infinite inventiveness, has the person who gets up to deliver that speech to the audience be himself. He puts himself in his novel. The speech he calls himself, what is the person who introduces him, refers to him as prolific, versatile author and scientist without portfolio. Philip Wiley was not a scientist. But that's how he thought of himself. That's how he is introducing himself in a dream scenario here. The speech I began to deliver was a modern version of the ancient practice, prophecy. I extrapolated. That is, I looked into the future by a method. The method of assembling the known in areas relevant to the interests of my biologist auditors, and from the unknown. And from the known, I tried to infer the probable. From the probable, the possible. And from the possible, the most likely events to occur. My record as a guesser of these things to come is the best record I have. And this is Philip Wiley addressing the reader directly, and he is right. Like I said, that is I believe, his legacy, if it's anything. So many of the discoveries, inventions, social changes, and ideas I predicted in print 10, 15, 25, and even 30 years ago have since become realities that recently I was invited by a major defense agency of our government to go on guessing for them. Remind me to tell you sometime the real story behind that invitation and what came of it. Oh my God. Oh my God. Somebody should write a biography of Philip Wiley. There is nothing secret or mystical about such latter-day prophecy. Anyone who knows the principle along which current facts and theories of science, going trends of human societies, their moods, and something of psychology can predict all sorts of future events and discoveries with a heady assurance that many will become realities. So my speech was based on tossing out just such predictions, and I had selected predictions that might disturb, excite, and maybe even somewhat alert my specialized listeners. So keep in mind, he is not giving us his speech. He's telling us what he said. But he's not showing us what he said, which would at least have been interesting. First, however, I drew a picture of the unexpected disaster that has befallen certain colleagues of my hearers, the physicists, when, after they made their A-bomb, they found themselves forced into the unwanted, unfamiliar, and to them, alarming worlds of politics and international diplomacy. Next, I avowed that my audience, and all biologists, were on the verge of finding themselves in a similar but more unnerving situation, and as unready as the bomb makers. Biology was close to its moment of truth. The time when findings would stun folks, alter basic attitudes, and change life ways. Then, they, the bioagents of the new conditions, would be held responsible by everybody else for trying to tell the public what exactly they discovered, what it meant, and what to do about it. Why? Who else could possibly do that job? I came that way to events in biology that were likely to occur in a year, in 10, in 20, and certain to shatter innumerable ideas and customs currently seen as immutable by Joe and Josephine Dokes. That's John and Jane Public to you. Several such events are imminent. Some of those I noted then have since materialized. Others were in the works, such as the synthesis of a living organism from inert matter. That will one day truly rock those who believe God created life, wherefore man can't. But he will, someday, thereby disillusioning the masses. Time is also coming, I went on, when we will know enough about genes to be able to arrange and rearrange our own, and so determine what kind of people our progeny will be. We shall be able to improve posterity, able to tinker with species and remodel it to whatever shape we select. The biologists who enabled that will be in some danger. For their new gift to humanity will imply this also: our present right to marry as we please and bear children by whomever we choose, without legal check or scientific altering of any gene-cankered ovum or sperm, the right to procreate as we want, can no longer be seen as tenable. Will men who prove that be admired for their integrity or assassinated? So far, biological advances have merely been exploited to retard humanity in this area of human continuum. Biological discovery is used to succor and sustain, to breeding age, the carriers of flawed genes, which, when they are returned to the genetic pool of mankind, like untreated sewage in a once clean lake. This is a new thing. Till recently, most such bearers of cracked chromosomes would have died in utero, at birth, in infancy, or prior to puberty, thereby sparing our species a long-range misery from their contamination. But modern medicine, applied biology, implements such preservation because modern man employs medicine to inflate an obviously mistaken sense of his untouchability. A lunatic might have the identical exhilaration when, jumping from a lofty cliff, he congratulated himself on the ecstasy of his fall, while able. Let's just press on. I'm sure you're thinking of the same word that I am. Let's just press on. This is a new sin with a capital S. This passion to preserve culls. And we decay by its commission, calling it humane and loving when it actually but exploits truth to allow us to evade both the truth we subvert and its hideous consequences. The future murder of masses and condemnation of greater masses to lives of torment, with the added certainty that if we continue thus to abet our self-corruption, it will end in the suicide of our sort. There are counter-arguments to that. I ignored them. For science already knows how to curtail greatly the criminal compulsion that pollutes our heritage by our bastard uses of science. Soon it will know all the means to prevent the abominations we now righteously impose upon posterity. To this end, recent and hideous procedure we need only to alter certain premises we now irrationally hold, concerning what we call sex morals, love, the sacred, aspects of marriage, and even part of what many include in ethics. And he puts ethics in scare quotes, obviously, at this point. But are we remotely ready as a species, I ask, to replace these going forms of idealism with forms of congruent to revealed truth? Americans, I note cogently, are no readier for that than Hindus are ready to slaughter the ruinous burden of their sacred cattle. What brand of virtue is it that embraces with fatuous sentimentality myriad exposed lies, but will not look at a truth to mend its wickedness? In the name of our God, we are 1,000,000 times more evil than any pagan, because we should know better. My next apostrophe concerned another application of biological knowledge that civilized man is busy with, the search through what we know of life forms to create new, decisive, even absolute weapons of war, of biological warfare, that could quite possibly wipe out an enemy without 1 ounce of hydrogen going into fusion. And might, too, eradicate everybody as handily as all-out H-war. So the narrator, who is Philip Wiley, has now moved on from advocating eugenics to talking about chemical warfare. Therefore, I turn to outer space as seen from a biological stance, noting that some astronauts might deliberately or inadvertently bring back to Earth presently organisms which, adapted to survival in harsher environs than our own, Mars, say, might exhibit to our planet a hardihood and fecundity sufficient to cause them to take over every viable niche, even against man's finely united opposition. Mere one-celled organisms might achieve this feat. I went on with this and other bio-blunders certain or likely to occur or become intensified in the near future. How would we arrange to die, for instance, when science has found the way to heal or prevent cancer, to transplant hearts and kidneys, to relieve us from the strokes and other vascular ills? What would a nation and species do when it became preponderantly a mass of the aged? Would people then in their 20 to 60-year-old group be willing to support 3 or 4 times their number of people from 60 to 100? and maybe even 110 or 20? What sense was there in such a prospect? Through that would be the certain result of our present ways. Are we insane? Since what we are attempting is crazy? At this point, Philip Wiley is either saying that scientific advances to a prolonged lifespan, that either those should be abandoned or the elderly should be abandoned, killed, because it's lunacy otherwise. I next turned their attention to certain inferences about human evolution currently drawn from the African findings of anthropologists Leakey, Dart, and others. Till those discoveries were announced, it was assumed man's superior brain had evolved because his increasing use of that organ to make tools, master fire, etc., manipulate his environs. But now it might soon be shown that man's brain had come into being the opposite way, not to create things, but to destroy them. For evolving man had lived in ceaseless war with stronger, better weaponed animals and with other men who contested his range. Sheer necessity, thus, had caused our early forebears to pick up even sharper rocks and sharper sticks and heavier rocks, longer sticks, and so on. That process had probably led to brain increment. If such a theory was correct, the human brain in its essence is not a creative organ evolved by imagination's spur. It is merely the result of external causes, and so, in effect, but a giant elaboration of the claw, the fang, and the squeezing muscles of the boa and the cobra toxin. An engine that weapons created, not vice versa. In that case, man may now near his doom, since he has weapons adequate for the final fight. And all recorded history, I added, tends to sustain the thesis that man is far more the witless killer than the creative sage. It's got to be a humdinger of a speech to sit through. Fortunately, it fails, as we're about to see. As I wrapped up that particular speculation, I was forced to face what I had for some time showed below the threshold of acknowledgement. The 1,000 or more face blobs beyond the wall of the stage lights were not attentive, and the attached psyches were not transmitting interest in my words. On the contrary, any reasonably perceptive person with public speaking experience has an ability to detect the covert reactions of the audience. Actors say the same thing. They may attribute such a capacity to a quasi-mystical perceptivity, for that implies an extraordinary keenness, and all of us would fain be regarded as very, very sharp. But such rumor of unearthly senses is hooey. The evidence of audience mood is palpable, however tenuous. A crowd held spellbound will emit soft gasps, low murmurs, give united nods, and the like. Even when not thus motile or audible, such a group will sit fixated on the person or persons it watches and hears. An audience that is hostile, however, will finally boo, stomp, snort, and jeer. Minimally, it will perform tiny, inaudible beginnings of those outbursts. Such manifestations, while trifling in an individual, will be easily perceptible when multiplied by hundreds. Here, Philip Wiley is saying that there's no mystical sense that you're losing your audience. You can tell by a whole bunch of little things. Little gestures, little shiftings, that sort of thing. Can't see those things behind the floodlights. It is really, it's not mystical, of course, because there's nothing mystical in life, but it's not that, because you're not looking at the audience. And you can't see those little details anyway, those little shiftings, little looking at the watches, all that sort of thing. And yet actors are right, and have been right all along, and also public speakers. I even know this, a little of this myself. You definitely know when you've lost an audience, or when you're losing one. And it's not because you're studying their physiognomy. My address was producing exactly those signatures of negative reactions. Throats were cleared unnecessarily. Unnecessary coughs that testified to hostile feelings rose up from the audience like a cloud of lead moths. How do lead moths fly, I ask you? Feet shuffled. Noses were blown with less than sympathetic discretion. A few people with aisle seats had furtively risen and tiptoed out of the auditorium. Their departure was, at the time and consciously, ascribed by me to calls of nature and sudden recollections of appointments not to be missed for any speech. But then more people left, and when I could be sure, by the very timing and angle of the turned heads and watched their departures, the crazed yearners to follow the deserters, I had to quit rationalizing. I had to face the fact. What I was saying was not acceptable to my audience. This was evidently one of my dullest talks, the kind I've told Horace might cause him embarrassment. But I was compelled to admit that even that was not correct. Scientists are mannerly people on the whole. They are accustomed to boring lecturers. But what was happening here was not owing to tedium. With rising levels of expression as I had talked on, this audience had become actively hateful towards me or my words. I began to falter. I would say the character, but it's not the character. Philip Wiley has not given him any out. He's not given himself any out. It's him. He puts himself in the book. And Philip Wiley spent the first half of this lecture advocating for eugenics, advocating for executing babies who have any kind of defect. Certainly allowing them to die. Even if you don't execute them, you allow them to die. And he followed that up by saying we should execute the old as well. And this monstrous carbuncle, to borrow a Garbaugust phrase from someone a long time ago, is just plopped in the middle of this book. And you are left to wonder, well, okay, since it's Philip Wiley who's saying this stuff, are these sentiments guiding the book in some way that I've been missing because I've been concentrating on how bad it is? Are these ideas in the book, or is Philip Wiley just saying, well, yeah, I'm telling you the story about the rich and the glitzy, but I want to do my Philip Wiley shtick before the book is over. I want to predict some things. And how much of those, what are we to make of those predictions? Genetic engineering? Genetic intervention? It's certainly a lot more known than it was when Philip Wiley wrote this book. I don't think that he or anybody else really predicted how badly that kind of research would be stalled, stopped, threatened by the Catholic Church, since it involves stem cells. I don't know that he really predicted how badly that would set things back. I think he probably, if you'd have gone to him in the 1960s and said, well, will genetic engineering of infants in utero be a common practice in 2025? I think, like everyone else, like all of us in the 1960s, he would have said no, because mankind will have undergone a nuclear war and there'll be no life in 2025. Because we all believe that. We all believe that. But if you'd said, all right, theorize, he'd have said, oh, certainly. If things go on the way they are, without a nuclear catastrophe, then yeah, infants will be genetically engineered in the womb. Of course they will be. If your advanced medical scanning allows you to know that your baby is going to be born with Down syndrome, you're going to manipulate the genetics of the infant in order to prevent that from happening. The image of a rapidly aging population being supported by out of proportion by a smaller and smaller part of the younger part of the population. It's interesting because you read a passage like this where not only is there prognostication going on, but that Philip Wiley has hauled himself on stage to do it as someone who is known for prognosticating. He doesn't even have the character do it. He just does it himself. When he does that, you're obviously supposed to sit up and take notice about these predictions. And yet he tells us that the speech goes over poorly with the scientists in the audience. Is that his not so subtle way of patting himself on the back? Always ahead of his time? I don't know. I have no idea. The book just kept galumphing on after that. We went back to our characters, none of whom are any more interesting than the character of Philip Wiley. And it came crashing to a dull ending. So I read a sudzer of this is basically a 1970s airport novel, only a little bit early. So in that sense, Philip Wiley was looking ahead of his time. Certainly qualifies for garbage, although it's not as unambiguous as I would like. I'm sure that Philip Wiley thought this was brilliant. Coming off the marginal success of Generation of Vipers, I'm sure that he thought it was. And the fact that it's not brilliant, the fact that it's not good, it's still not bad in the way of Able Team or The Specialist. So I might want to move into purer waters of trash tonight. I'll give some thought to it, and I'll report back tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.